Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Noelle and I review and unbox subscription boxes here on my channel, but today I have my third installment in our Bridgerton box unboxing series. So Once Upon a Book Club, which is a monthly book subscription, created 2 volumes. Each of them has 4 of the Bridgerton books, so there are 8 Bridgerton books. Technically there's actually prequels and books that follow it up, but for the main 8 children of the Bridgerton family, they each have their own story. They each have their own book. So they did 4 in the first volume and 4 in the second volume. This is what the first volume looks like. It's actually what the second volume looks like as well, but much, much bigger. Now, I did purchase these. I got them on pre-order. The first volume is no longer available. However, you can get the first 4 books for $120. They had special editions made with the help of Julia Quinn, which I think is really lovely. They look great together on a shelf. You can still get the second volume though. That is $195. So if you, like many others I know, are looking forward to season 3 of the Bridgerton series on Netflix, then you might want to get in on this. It's very fun to be in that whole world, that Regency era world where there's a lot of romance. It's very like silly sometimes, but it is just a really enjoyable read for me. It's just a lot lighter than a lot of the books that I usually read. So I've had a good time with it. So like I said, I have already done 2 videos talking about the first 2 novels and the gifts that came along with it. And today we are going to be talking about the last 2 novels in the first volume, and then I will move on to, of course, the second box. Now, if you are not familiar with what Once Upon a Book Club does, they have a monthly subscription. They actually have a middle grader subscription, young adult, and adult now. It's $49.99 per month. I do have a code and a link for you. It's Noelle10 that'll save you 10%. And they do the same thing that they did with these Bridgerton boxes, which is as you read along, you'll come to a page where there's a sticky note that says to open the corresponding gift, and then you'll find a gift that's perhaps, like in this example, in a little box with the page number, and then you open that up. And the whole idea is to encourage your reading, to really bring the book to life. And for the monthly boxes, they just do hints, so you kind of have an idea of what's coming up, what genre it is at least, and you can decide if you want to skip that month or maybe switch to young adult from adult or vice versa. That's also possible with the monthly subscription. But let's get back to the Bridgerton box. So the Bridgerton box came, like all of the regular monthly boxes, with a fun bookmark as well that kind of matches the inside cover, and then also a quote card. This is from, of course, the first one. And then we also had our guide. This one was written to be like Lady Whistledown's society papers, of course. And then we did get a nice interview on the interior with Julia Quinn. Now, I am very excited to finally watch Bridgerton Series 3 because I watched the first 2 seasons, which were books 1 and 2, which are the ones I've already reviewed. So this was my first opportunity to read a book without already sort of having characters in my head, right? Now they're actually skipping book number 3, which is the one we're talking about today, which is An Offer from a Gentleman. And this is the color, this is the cover. So they're skipping Benedict's story to move on to Penelope and Colin. Yes, so we already know that Penelope is going to wind up with Colin. So they're giving non-Bridgerton, I feel like people are calling it Penelope's story, even though really it's Colin's story. And if you're not familiar with this, this might not make sense to understand this whole huge family that has 8 children who have been named alphabetically from Anthony to Benedict to Colin to Daphne. We actually started with Daphne, so it's not necessarily in chronological order. So it's kind of curious to me that they're skipping Benedict's story, which is the one we're talking about today, because it's a very sweet sort of rags to riches Cinderella story. I mean, it is very much a retelling of the Cinderella story, but I really enjoyed it. So I hope that they give Benedict and Sophie his love her due. So, all right, you guys, let's go ahead and get into it. Now, with this particular box, there were, I believe, 3 books. Technically 3 books. We'll talk about that in a second. And each of them had 3 gifts. In volume number 2, there are 4 books. I know there's a total of 8. Don't worry. There are a total of 4 books, and each of them has 2 gifts. So I'm not sure if I'm going to do 2 books per video for the next 2 videos, or if each of them is going to get their own, because I do like to read the passages so that you understand the gifts a little bit more. So the first gift did come in this one, which is page 152. So let's see. And now that I've read some of the books, I'm like noticing more of the differences, obviously, with the series. Some storylines that I feel like they may have borrowed from later books, or some storylines that they might have added to add some drama, like they definitely did that with Anthony and Kate. They kind of added some like drama to it, and I'm kind of wondering how they're going to work around some of those shifts and changes they've done. So maybe that's why, because I feel like they've presented Benedict in a very different light than the way I had him presented in this particular book. So this is what it looks like when you come to one of the sticky notes like this. And I'm going to go back a little bit now that I'm looking at this passage so that you understand a little bit more. So Sophie is like Cinderella. She's basically had a terrible stepmother and then was basically forced to be a maid, and her stepsisters were kind of awful, and now she's found herself being rescued as she was trying to run away. She's found herself being rescued, of course, by Benedict. So here we go. Sophie sucked in her breath, an unbidden smile lighting her face. She'd never dreamed that Benedict was an artist. There had never even been a peep about it in Whistledown, and it seemed like the sort of thing the gossip columnist would have figured out over the years. Sophie drew the sketchbook closer to her candle and flipped through the pages. She wanted to sit with the book and spend 10 minutes perusing each sketch, but it seemed too intrusive to examine his drawings in such detail. She was probably just trying to justify her nosiness, but somehow it didn't seem as bad just to give them a glance. The landscapes were varied. Some were of My Cottage, which is the name of his cottage. It's actually called My Cottage, or should she call it his cottage? And some were of a larger house, which Sophie supposed was the country home of the Bridgerton family. Most of the landscapes featured no architecture at all, just a babbling brook or a windswept tree or a rain-dappled meadow. And the amazing thing about his drawings was that they seemed to capture the whole and true moment. Sophie could swear that she could hear that brook babbling or the wind ruffling the leaves on that tree. The portraits were fewer in number, but Sophie found them infinitely more interesting. There were several of what had to be his littlest sister, and a few of what she thought must be his mother. One of Sophie's favorites was of what appeared to be some kind of outdoor game. At least 5 Bridgerton siblings were holding long mallets, and one of the girls was depicted at the forefront, her face screwed up in determination as she tried to aim a ball through a wicket. Of course, the Bridgerton Pall Mall says, something about the picture almost made Sophie laugh out loud. She could feel the merriment of the day, and it made her long desperately for a family of her own. She glanced back at Benedict, still sleeping quietly in his bed. So he rescued her in the rain, and he had already had a cold, so he kind of fell ill, and she's nursing him back to health. Did he realize how lucky he was to have been born into such a large and loving clan? With a sigh, Sophie flipped through a few more pages until she reached the end of the book. The very last sketch was different from the rest, if only because it appeared to be of a night scene, and the woman in it was holding her skirts above her ankles as she ran across. Good God, Sophie gasped, thunderstruck. It was her. She brought the sketch closer to her face. He'd gotten the details of her dress, that wonderful, magical silver concoction that had been hers for only a single evening, perfectly. He'd even remembered her long, elbow-length gloves and the exact manner in which her hair had been styled. Her face was a little less recognizable, but one would have to make allowances for that, given he'd never actually seen it in its entirety. So she had managed to get to a masquerade ball with the help of some other servants, and of course he had fallen in love with her, but that was years before. So she sees herself because he's been obsessed with her. And inside we have, and again, the boxes, the packaging that Once Upon a Book Club does are so, so lovely. Look, it even has like a liner pattern. I just think that's nice. So we got this lovely journal / sketchbook. So let me open this up. I actually thought this was very, very nice. And let me show you some of the details. So look how pretty that is. It's a nice faux embossed or engraved leather. And then we have this nice magnetic closure. Like it looks like it should pull out in this direction, but it's actually just a magnetic strap. So isn't that nice, you guys? Let me see if I can make it work. So it just closes like that. I thought that was really pretty nice. It seems like pretty good quality. And then it does actually have a little pen slot. Let me show you. There's a pen slot right there. And then there's also on this opposing side, we have little wallet space. So you could definitely use it for travel. And then of course there's a like 6-ring binder. So you could put anything you want in it. Here they actually included a sketch of the Bridgertons, at least 5 of them playing Pall Mall, which is fun. I'm guessing that's probably Daphne, even though we all know the game from Kate playing. And then we also have an image of Sophie at the masquerade ball in her gorgeous gown, and of course she was wearing a mask, so that's why he hasn't been able to figure it out that this is one and the same gal. So I actually thought this was pretty nice. So that's what that looks like. I thought that was a good quality gift, and I liked the little details that they did to bring the story to life. So our next one came on page 258. Not as exciting of packaging, I will admit. It was just a little mailer bag. But this is what I've been expecting for a while. It was why we only got the first 3 books. I was like, where is the 4th book? It is, of course, one of the gifts. So for me, it's really like we really only got 2 gifts for this one. But let me go ahead and read the passage before for this one. So again, it's on page 258. Okay, so he still hasn't recognized her yet, but they're kind of flirting a little bit. It says, "I would be pleased to participate in this conversation to a greater degree," he drawled, "except that you have not seen fit to share with me any of the details of your life. It was not an oversight on my part," he clucked disapprovingly. "So hostile." Her eyes bugged out. "You abducted me." "Coerced," he reminded her. "Do you want me to hit you?" "I wouldn't mind it," he said mildly. "And besides, now that you're here, was it really so very terrible that I browbeat you into coming? You like my family, don't you?" "Yes, but, and they treat you fairly, right?" He's gotten her a place as maid in his mom's house. In Violet's house. "And they treat you fairly, right?" "Yes, but then what," he asked, his tone most supercilious, "is the problem?" Sophie almost lost her temper. She almost jumped to her feet and grabbed his shoulders and shook and shook and shook. But at the last moment, she realized that that was exactly what he wanted her to do. And so instead, she merely sniffed and said, "If you cannot recognize the problem, there is no way that I could explain it to you." He laughed. "Damn the man." "My goodness," he said, "that was an expert sidestep." She picked up her book and opened it. "I'm reading." "Trying, at least," he murmured. She flipped a page, even though she hadn't read the last 2 paragraphs. She was really just trying to make a show of ignoring him, and besides, she could always go back and read them later after he left. "Your book is upside down," he pointed out. Sophie gasped and looked down. "It is not." He smiled slyly. "But you still had to look to be sure, didn't you?" She stood up and announced, "I'm going inside." So he caught her. It was not upside down, but of course we have book number 4, which is Penelope and Colin's story in this very bright magenta color. So let me just show you what all the books so far look like together. Let me see. Very pink and purple, very romantic, but very sort of reminiscent of all of the pretty colors in the costuming that we see on the Bridgerton series on television. This is what they look like. So I think that is a lovely set of books to have on your shelf. They are quite hefty, of course, when you hold them all together. So let me go ahead and get to our final gift. Of course, everything turns out happily ever after. It just takes a little while for him to realize who his Cinderella is. So the last one came on page 354. So it just came in a little baggie like this. This is the moment when he finally realizes who she is, because she is playing with the children. They're playing kind of a version of hide and seek. So she has a scarf over her eyes, much like the mask that was over her eyes at the ball. And so he finally recognizes who she is. So let's see. Okay, so he tells the children to go away. He shut the door. The click was so loud she jumped. "What's wrong?" she whispered. He said nothing, just watched her as she tore at the scarf. He liked it that she was helpless. He didn't feel terribly kind and charitable at the moment. "Do you have something you need to tell me?" he asked. His voice was controlled, but his hands were shaking. She went still, so still that he would have sworn that he could see the heat rise from her body. Then she cleared her throat, an uncomfortable, awkward sort of sound, and went back to work on the knot. Her movements tightened her dress around her breasts, but Benedict felt not one speck of desire. It was, he thought ironically, the first time he hadn't felt desire for this woman in either of her incarnations. "Can you help me with this?" she asked, but her voice was hesitant. Benedict didn't move. "Benedict? It's interesting to see you with a scarf tied around your head, Sophie," he said softly. Her hands dropped slowly to her sides. "It's almost like a demi-mask, wouldn't you say?" Her lips parted, and the soft rush of air that crossed them was the room's only noise. He walked toward her, slowly, inexorably, his footsteps just loud enough so that she had to know he was stalking her. "I haven't been to a masquerade in many years," he said. She knew. He could see it in her face, the way she held her mouth tight at the corners, yet still slightly open. She knew that he knew. He hoped she was terrified. He took another 2 steps toward her, then abruptly turned to the right, his arm brushing past her sleeves. "Were you ever going to tell me that we'd met before?" Her mouth moved, but she didn't speak. "Were you?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "No," she said, her voice wavering. "Really?" She didn't make any sound. "Any particular reason?" It didn't seem pertinent." He whirled around. "It didn't seem pertinent," he snapped. "I fell in love with you 2 years ago, and it didn't seem pertinent." "Can I please remove the scarf?" she whispered. "You can remain blind." "Benedict, like I was blind this past month," he continued angrily. "Why don't you see how you like it?" "You didn't fall in love with me 2 years ago," she said, yanking at the too tight scarf. "How would you know? You disappeared." "I had to disappear," she cried out. "I didn't have a choice." "We always have choices," he said condescendingly. "We call it free will." "That's easy for you to say," she snapped, tugging frantically at the blindfold. "You, who have everything. I had to—" Oh! With one wrenching movement, she somehow managed to yank down the scarves until they hung loosely around her neck. "And we know who she is. She's kept it to herself, and he's really silly to have not realized it. But we have a scarf inside," which I thought was good. It is a big moment in the story, and it made sense to have a scarf instead of, a scarf is something we would actually use. I'm not going to necessarily use gloves or a masquerade mask, so I'm happy that we didn't get something like that. So it's just very pink, very floral, but again, I've said it before, but I don't mind pink with gray. Somehow that works for me when it's like tempered with gray. So it's just a nice big fashion scarf with some tassels at the short ends, very like gauzy and light. And I guess if you doubled it enough, you could probably use it as a blindfold, and she probably looked very cute with it over her eyes. So finally, Benedict has found his lady from years ago, and we can get on to reading book 4. So I thought that I would just read to you sort of the teaser for book number 4 to get us all even more excited, of course, about the upcoming season. I'm very curious now that I've read this to see how they're going to interpret it for the show. So Penelope Featherington has secretly adored her best friend's brother for, well, it feels like forever. After half a lifetime of watching Colin Bridgerton from afar, she thinks she knows everything about him, until she stumbles across his deepest secret and fears she doesn't know him at all. Sorry, you guys, I slammed the book down on there. Colin Bridgerton is tired of being thought nothing but an empty-headed charmer, tired of the never-ending sameness of his life, and most of all, tired of everyone's preoccupation with the notorious gossip columnist Lady Whistledown, who can't seem to publish an edition without mentioning him in the first paragraph. But when Colin returns to London from a trip abroad, he discovers nothing in his life is quite the same, especially Penelope Featherington, the girl who was always simply there is suddenly the girl haunting his dreams. But when he discovers that Penelope has secrets of her own, this elusive bachelor must decide. Is she his biggest threat or his promise of a happy ending? And if you have watched the Bridgerton series, you know what Penelope's secret is. You might not know what Colin's secret is yet. But, on the show, he's still thinking about Miss Thompson a little bit. So very curious to see how that is going to sort itself out. And I'm also very curious about the second 4 books, which are going to be about, of course, we've already had Daphne. So we've had Daphne, Anthony, Benedict, Colin, which means now we're on to Eloise, who is Penelope's best friend, Francesca, who I swear is never around at all, Gregory, and finally our little troublemaker and the youngest, which is Hyacinth. So very curious because, of course, we aren't necessarily going to have the foil of Lady Whistledown telling us all about everything that's going on in society. So very curious to see what they do with the series. If they do all of the stories, I honestly would love to see that, and if they're able to use the same actors as they get a little bit older. And then I would even love to see them do a rendition of the second epilogues that Julia Quinn created for the novels, which were included in these editions, which I super appreciate, where we see them many years later once they've all had their children and all kinds of things. So I'm into it. I'm all in. I was very skeptical. It's very like fluffy, you know, content. The show as well, like, but now I'm into it. Now I'm just like, I'm ready to binge watch another season. Guys, let me know what you thought about this one, what you thought about the gifts. I didn't really like that they had one of the books be the gift, just because you kind of figured it out because you knew we had to get the fourth book at some point. But I'm very excited about the next one, and I've really enjoyed this limited edition box. I'll see you soon in my next unboxing.